as though there is no worry about an end and we'll all have a reset. I mean, the powers that be are acting as though there's no consequences for their actions ever, and that they're real close to being able to bug out, I guess. So that's further proof that something's up. Now, the global coastal event, as we've described it, as well as the farsight.org study and the validation studies, is not the end of the world. It's a good kick, but we'll take the situation as, a martial arts kind of thing, and after we fall down, we get up, and we learn from having fallen down. So in this situation, we've got ports that will flood, some ports that will be dry for some period. I don't know how long. Not permanently, and certainly not weeks, but maybe a day or 2 days. But then we do have indications that permanent flooding will occur. The permanent flooding is indicated to come from both the ocean side of things and also from inundation. Our descriptors on the inundation are for some waves of rivers in the sky that actually, insofar as the North American continent are concerned, sort of collide. So there's some indication that whatever occurs in the Pacific as part of the global coastal event also happens in the Atlantic simultaneously, producing enough water in the atmosphere that at some point later on, these gigantic rivers of water in the atmosphere collide over the continental divide area or mid-continent part of the United States or North America, because it continues all the way up into Canada and comes all the way down to actually into Central America, and there's a giant level of inundation that causes huge levels of flooding. So we have flooding both on the coast from the ocean sloshing about, as well as flooding inland. The flooding inland, not within the farsight.org and not within the validation studies, but within our global coastal event stuff that goes all the way back to 2003, described things like inland seas that would form and so much water coming down that mountains would slide around and shut off river here, and the river would be forced to find a new course over there and would create new lakes and so on. So a whole lot of water activity. And you should bear this in mind if you live near any kind of water. That's rivers, etc. I'll actually talk about that in half a second if I can recall. Let me make a note about this, about the Deschutes. Anyway, so our flooding descriptors were varied because we had the oceanic flooding that was going to be tidal, that would just keep coming in and coming in and coming in, and the high tide would come on in, and as far as we could determine, it would not retreat. And then the next day we'd have another high tide from that point, and it would extend further inland, and we would have to retreat, and the ocean wouldn't. So that was the effect that was described in the global coastal event. Now, it was a descriptor set that grew over time. We should probably call it the collection of global coastal phenomena that impact us for a number of weeks or months, because it's unknown as to how long it goes on. It could be that a lot of these major effects happen in a relatively short period of time, and I would suspect that would be the case if there was some form of impact. Okay, so the inundation component of this we've analyzed. I have with two other guys that I really trust, that are geologists that I've worked with in local government. And they tell me that some of my calculations were pretty accurate in terms of a general sense. And we can make some assumptions about the validation studies that were done for other individuals and the level of inundation that comes down inland as a part of the global coastal event. And these validation studies show that by June 1, these inland areas in Ontario and Arkansas are drying out. The drying out relative to their local soils suggests to me that whatever the global coastal event, whenever it occurs, the rain portion of the inundation that affects Ontario and Arkansas within North America occurs on or before May 20th. Given the level of descriptions of the water that's coming down and the result, it would take some number of days, at least 10 days I calculate, for this to drain off to the point where we would end up with the images that the remote viewers show for these areas as of June 1. In other words, the areas are still saturated, unnaturally so, with water, but have been drying out for a number of days. So the implication is that our our global coastal event has occurred in such a period of time that the water could have been thrown up into the air and could have traveled whatever distance it had to in order to arrive and then come down on these areas in order to have started drying out by May 20th. That is to say, I figure that the rain part of it is done by then. Now, it could be that all that happens in a day. I don't know. Who knows how fast it's going to occur relative to what kind of forces are involved. What I was trying to do is to narrow down the window of opportunity, if you will, potential for this global coastal event to occur and meet the conditions as outlined by the remote viewers. Now, bear in mind, it is the remote viewers study that gave us a time period of June 1. Because our global coastal event, while it had all kinds of descriptors and temporal markers as to what would occur first, second, third, etc., did not have initiation points and didn't have a termination point in terms of days or date. We do know from the remote viewing that the termination point of the particular study was June 1, 2013. The validation studies that I did had a termination point that was 3 days ahead of that at the end of May and earlier. So we have a situation where, and now, by the way, we have, as I say, all of the authorities acting and providing us with some validation, shutting up the seed vaults and, all of their weird activities, all kinds of strange military goings on, all the purchase of all the ammo, everybody rush behind the scenes here in the Anglo-American Empire, and everybody not so behind the scenes rushing about in the Sino-Russian sphere of influence. So that's going on, and the global coastal event, when it occurs, in our descriptors was never a giant wave that would go across any kind of continent or anything like that. This is a life-altering event for humanity, truly, and the descriptor in the global coastal event had said so. The descriptor also pointed out that it would cause, at some point, a total number of deaths that was on the order of 1.289 billion people. So we would reduce the population by, say, about a little over a sixth, something like that. And the loss of the ports and all the infrastructure would affect the rest of the population for a number of decades, for generations, actually described as being a 4-generation to 5-generation, depending on where you're at, recovery time. We peg a generation within my work here is 21 years, so we're looking in, at least 80 to 100 years in recovery from this event. The recovery, it's kind of a loose, ambiguous word. We're not talking recovery of the population so much in terms of the place where it was within the set, rather as recovery of our current status as, world-dominating species, that sort of thing. So, in any event, the global coastal event was described as doing certain things, taking out telecommunications by destroying the underseas cables. As well as disrupting, because it's an expansion process, disrupting the GPS. Now, it's also possible that if an expansion event occurred here in the Earth, it could send out magnetic waves that would also disrupt satellites, or could be participating in a solar event that would also disrupt satellites, because, our thinking on that was that in some level there is such degradation in the infrastructure that it's the satellite infrastructure is gone for 20 plus years. So these descriptors now are vague because of the nature of the vagueness of the language. They're also negative because of the way in which our work has tendency to concentrate negative language. If accurate, though, if we took them at their word, so to speak, looked at each and every one of the words within the sets and put them all together as we have in the past, and we've been rather obsessing on it anyway. But if we go ahead and look at all of this, then we see we don't see a Mad Max kind of a world in which there's only a few survivors. We see a world in which the coastal infrastructure globally has been devastated, forcing the populace back inland with ultimately, over the course of an unknown number of years, death rate of about 1/6 of the populace as a result of this event. Now, a number of these people will die later simply because of lack of medication and so on, and that would be included in the way in which our data would calculate all of the, or come up with numeric representation for what's going on. because it does it over a long period of time. This is an extremely long period data set that had been run. And so over the totality of it, we'll lose about a sixth of the population. So again, it's not saying that a sixth of the population drowns that day or anything. But of course, as we know, if you lose the electricity in the United States, you can figure that there will be a death of about 2.2 million people within the course of the next 35 days, simply because of the lack of emergent and continuous medical care. And that's just the first wave. There's a longer period that occurs some 4 to 5 months after that, with less emergent but still chronic diseases that need to be treated. So there are these many issues to be considered as we go into this. This is just a harsh appraisal of it. Now, the global coastal event says that there is a destruction of what we think of as the digital economy, with digital money and all of this. That does not mean that market for precious metals goes away. It means that the precious metals market is therefore instantly reduced to the local area. And that changes everything, and that's why we have this weirdness with the potential price for silver and stuff. We have the long-term forecast that showed that the price of silver as a temporal marker, actually, prior to the global coastal event, would go soaring. And at some point would reach $600 an ounce. I have no way of determining if that $600 an ounce is a relative thing just before the global coastal event or afterwards and in some local environment. We just cannot say, because all of this is bound up in this whole area of a very large amount of inputs all at the same time that we humans call chaos. So there's going to be a chaotic period where we have all different kinds of things go on. And in my way of thinking, just monkey mind, just having looked at the data, I'm making the assumption that there will be a very large run-up in silver and that it will be somewhere between $100 and $600 an ounce about the time that the global coastal event happens. And I'm unable to say when and specifically how long in advance of that this will occur, because the way the long-term data was structured in the background, if you will, of the global coastal event, of the setup prior to that, was the condition of all of these various different things going on, including the run-up in silver and the degradation of the dollar and this kind of thing. And then wham, we get hit by the global coastal event, which makes all of that moot. But it does not remove the need for or the use of precious metals thereafter, because we had sets that showed the precious metal exchange after the global coastal event. That is to say, the data sets had been gathered in the year 2000 and 2001 and 2 that were discussing the extreme long-term precious metals as with two significant indicators, two significant linguistic components that came out of it. One of the significant linguistic components was that the ratio between gold and silver would go to unity. 1 ounce of gold would equal 1 ounce of silver. How long that would last, I don't know, but it wasn't seen as being permanent. And then the second thing was that gold would return to its historic value, which was the ability to buy a life for a year. And by that it meant if you had an ounce of gold, you could buy the wherewithal, rent, everything, food, all included, for a year. For yourself, or you could buy a human and the food that would necessary to keep that human for a year in the form of a slave, or you could buy a bunch of cows, the functional equivalent of the human in cows, that kind of thing. So an ounce of gold was basically life for a year, and at some point we're going to return back to that level of understanding of it. I had those indicators back in 2000, 2001, 2002 without really any clue as to why that would be the case. But I knew it would be a long-term, I didn't realize it would be over a decade, but that it would be a long-term proposition before they came in, just because of the long-term data set. Now, a lot of the other projections for the gold and silver have happened, and they came out of that set as well. So again, it looks as though that was a very prescient set. It was a subset to and participated in what I call the background of the global coastal event. And by background, it just really means that I'm not looking at it specifically at the time that I'm doing the interpretation, but it's running along simultaneously with the set that I'm examining, which was, in this case, the global coastal event. Now, the global coastal event may take out electricity in a lot of areas, and it may do so for decades. There's an indication that our particular area up here in the Northwest, that